Thank you, Michelle, for providing fascinating insights into the future of mining systems and its solutions. We have now come to the most exciting part of our event today. That is the panel discussion on future of mining and challenges. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Gavin Yates, who will be moderating the event. Gavin is an industry leader in geoscience, mining, and technology, building on a 35-year career with BHP, where he held senior executive roles as head of global group-wide technical functions, including geoscience, mining, metallurgy, and technology. In that role, Gavin led the program of innovation that developed and implemented at scale the Integrated Remote Operations Center, autonomous haulage, autonomous drilling, and operating technology refresh. In the last role with BHP, Gavin led the development of a board-level, comprehensive global technology strategy, which is now being implemented. Since leaving BHP in 2016, he now consults to mining and mets companies, governments, and research organizations. Gavin is currently chair of the Premier's Research Industry Fund Consortium in South Australia and has been consulting at board level for CRCOR, the AUST IMM, and Amira. Gavin continues to publish widely on innovation in mining and is currently the interim chair of the Copper for Tomorrow CRC bid. Gavin brings a deep understanding of the mining industry and its professionals, along with a vision for the future. Over to you, Gavin.
Thanks very much, and welcome everyone to this panel session. Hopefully we'll have some lively discussion, and I'm going to first allow the other panelists to introduce themselves and give them give you a bit of background about themselves before we go into the topic. And the topic for today is going to be the future of mining and its current challenges. So we're going to explore a little bit out in the future of what it might look like in the future, and then what are the challenges in getting there. But let's start with first an introduction of the fellow panelists. Let's start with Preti. Preti, do you want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of insight into yourself and your background?
Thank you, Gavin, and welcome everyone to the Future of Mining panel discussion. My name is Preti. I've been working in the technology industry in areas of tech and transformation almost now for 20 years, coming up to it, showing my age I am. With most recently in the last 5.5 years as the Vice President of Strategy and Transformation for Schneider Electric, really focused on industrial infrastructure technologies around the areas of energy management and industrial automation. Also, as we progressed there, I actually was tasked by the Schneider Electric Ventures Group to lead an IoT business in the home energy services space, which was called Clipsal Solar, and I became the CEO of that. And then, of course, yet another smart industry challenge was posed to me, and I was invited to join as the MD of Modis Australia. Modis is a company which is committed to the purpose of smart industry, really specializing in energy, environment, utilities, financial services type of sectors, and really operating at the intersection of IT and OT. A topic dear to my heart, one that I have been traversing for many years as a professional now. And certainly looking forward to continue to do so as we build this conversation around future of mining and technology.
Great. Thanks, Preti. And I think what we're really going to explore is that intersection even with IT, OT and the mining industry and where that takes us. I want to now introduce Sumit. If you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending upon which part of the world you are dialing in. My name is Sumit. I am based out of Perth, which is, I call the mining hub of the globe. I am working as the managing director of Accenture. I look after part of the industry 4 and the operation technology. I think what you're talking here, the convergence of the IT, OT, that's what I feel I belong to. Out of my 25 years, I actually started my career working in a plant as a process engineer, and actually I built up my career from there on, spending time in terms of building controllers with Honeywell, the real sense of actually bringing the technology to at its play with in the OT space. And last 10 or so year, I have been part of Accenture and actually driving the digital transformation through technology, and predominantly in the OT space, because that's where I see the value, the most impact can be realized. And I really thank you for me to giving me the opportunity to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation in next hour or so. Thanks, giving back to you.
Thanks, Sumit. Great to have you on the panel. And lastly, our third panel member is Michael Goodsight. Michael, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, everybody. Friends from IIT. I'm Michael Goodsight. I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Adelaide here in Australia. And I have led the School of Civil, Environmental and Mining Engineering, the Australian School of Petroleum. And now I am director of the university's Institute for Mineral and Energy Resources, where one of our major efforts is to put together what's called a cooperative research center for copper for tomorrow. And that is a planned to be a 10-year, multi-million-dollar industry-led research effort. And I'd be excited to talk with anybody interested in joining that bid following this panel. I was a visiting professor at Delhi University, so I know it's not quite IIT, but it's still a pretty nice place to visit. And I'm presently on a couple of grants where we're directly working with IIT Delhi, Delhi University, and some other good colleagues. And I'm also on the International Advisory Board of one of India's newest public universities. So very excited to be on the panel today, and thanks, Gavin. Back to you.
Yeah, and Michael brings a wealth of experience in environmental engineering too, which I think we'll try and tap into his background there as well, as I think that's one of the challenges facing. So I'm now going to go back to Preti and ask her to outline what she sees the future of mining might be. And I'm probably going to stretch a bit, Preti. I'm looking out 10 years or more. But then you come back to the shorter term, what does that mean for us and what some of those challenges might be? And we'll drill down on some of those as we go on in the panel session.
All right. I'll take some creative liberties since we are going out 10 years. I'm going to coin a term, and I don't know if it's patented or not, but I was thinking about it last night, Gavin, and I thought perhaps what we're really looking towards 10 years from now is zero-touch mining. And when I think about zero-touch mining, I think of the full autonomous mine with visual simulations, digital twins, very much tapping into the physical world of autonomous vehicles and sensor-driven data, real-time communicating back to a center where all people working in it are completely safe. But not only that, they're able to do simulation modeling before, in fact, a drilling or an extraction activity is undertaken. They're able to do predictive analytics on haulage activities, and they're able to predict how much the cost optimization would look like before anyone sets foot on the ground. Now, why I think that might be a reality is because of where we are today. There are challenges to achieving that. However, the opportunity does exist. The opportunity exists because already, if you think about the mining industry in Australia, I mean, the IoT and automation intersect is not news to us. It's not new news. We've been on this journey. Many of our large mining organizations have widely been accepting, this idea. I mean, it's and there is sort of stats around the fact that eventually the Internet of Things will provide potential benefits to the tune of 22 to 35 billion annual run rate for mining sector in Australia. So here's I think the underlying sort of foundations of why I believe this is something that we could create. I mean, of course, IoT's fundamental view is that we will create efficiency, a smarter connected future of the mine, and sensing of data, doing machine diagnostics at the edge of devices, and working out whether a particular machine or a piece of equipment is underperforming, and being able to send alerts to remote operations centers is something that is alive well and today already. So the next stage of that potentially is taking the next layer of, I suppose, artificial intelligence on it, where we can make decisions, not only about what we're extracting, but what are the best routes to, in fact, send, our stockpile from one place to another. And it's all sort of informed by not only the mine-specific data, but other data that might be available in a mining operation from the external markets as well. And ultimately, I think, what is also real is the use of drones. Autonomous drones are again well and alive. They're conducting land surveys. I mean, if we look back 5-7 years ago, that was not something we were really thinking about, but it's absolutely in use today. And it's being coupled with LiDAR and satellite imagery to create effectively digital twins and virtual representations of open pit mines and landscapes. So we're getting there. So it makes me think like, perhaps a zero-touch mine in 10 years from now might be a reality, although it does remind me a little bit of Star Trek and its digital simulations as well sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to press you a little bit there, Sumit, and I like the zero-touch mining, as I've been publishing papers around zero-entry mining, and I also think it's back in conversation in mining very strongly just in the last few weeks, because there's been, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been 2 major fatalities just in Australia at mines. And they were, one was fall of ground and one was the man-machine interface or interaction. And arguably, with the technology we have today, they are potentially preventable. We don't need to necessarily put people down there. So the question to you is, what is missing from a technology point of view, or what do we need to do to make that future a reality? What is it that we can't go there now? Why can't we go there
now? The question is for me, Gavin. I'm taking it, right? So
okay.
I think the key challenge is, when you talk about it, there are multiple layers, and I think it's very unfortunate that we are, absolutely the future of mining, the zero-touch mining is possible in 10 years, but I think we are not able to make it zero harm, right, which is making it safer for the workforce, right? I think we're not able to safeguard our people, the workforce, and also the asset and environment. What it's stopping, I think there are multiple factors. I'll probably focus on 2 points. Number one, I will talk about the interoperability, right? Interoperability, because I think there's a certain level of automation which is possible, right? If you make it interoperable across the disciplines, right? Whether you are doing an inspection job in a surface mine or looking at the processing side, right? If you make it interoperable, if you start to trust your data, and then actually you can ascertain your risk, and then hence and go forward in the route of your zero harm mining, as to achieve the zero touch mining as Preeti talked about. And then actually you can extend the interoperability not only from your discipline, but actually you can extend that across your assets, right? Because the experience what certain resources bring, because having worked in one mine site, you cannot replicate that to the other mine site because they are quite different. So that's where actually the interoperability comes into picture. You can actually extend and expand the interoperability across how you engineer one site, from a pit to port perspective, from the whole value chain point of view, how you engineer all your systems, again, kind of not having the interoperable ecosystem. And I see actually allowing, and technology is definitely a part of the answer, in terms of what can be done to make it actually interoperate across the discipline. Second is actually, the second part I would like to touch upon is a culture bit, right? In terms of definitely, we always talk about the zero harm, right, to making it safer, but at times we are impressed, in terms of finishing a task, before the shift or before the roster or before, the shutdown, whatever we have. And I think by better planning and actually having the culture of proactively managing the risk across, and actually also proactively improving and looking for efficiencies and productivity and throughput, definitely the answer lies there. And I think some of the elements from an enabler point of view, what Preeti talked about in terms of data, AI, edge, automation, right, which can actually make it much safer and actually en route to the zero touch mining, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. And I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about the culture piece, and particularly, I accept that interoperability is a problem, and we have automation, let's say, of individual pieces of equipment like trucks or drills, but we don't have a fully automated system where everything talks to each other. But even in the individual pieces of equipment, there's a big difference between where the leaders are and the big companies, particularly in iron ore, and some of the mid-tier and smaller companies are. And I'm seeing a huge gap between what I call the leaders and the laggards. It's massive. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, no, definitely. I see you talked about culture, right? And then actually difference between the leaders and the laggards. Again, the element around looking this as an industry, right? And especially when it comes to the safety, making the solution available, accessible, right? To even the laggards and the tier 2 or the tier 3 miner. I definitely see there is a benefit in terms of the overall from an industry perspective. And then second point, in terms of the culture and sharing the information, I think by sharing the information, the learning across, whether you looking at the surface mining, looking at the process mining, and looking at the automation bit, I definitely see as an industry, we can actually excel together. I see a shared success model rather than actually trying to preserve, right? And that's where the ecosystem plays a big part to it, right? Rather than trying to actually make it, limited to certain part of a geography or a nation or a company or an asset, and so on. So, empowering helping and empowering I would say the laggards or tier 2, tier 3 mining via the ecosystem, but also with the large miner, I certainly see that will help in a larger industry perspective, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. I want to now push to Michael to have him talk about some of the challenges ahead. And Michael, just to prompt you on that, we've been talking about some of the technical sides of this, but mining increasingly is being challenged in other areas. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. As we all know, with the Paris Agreement and other international agreements, Gavin, there are commitments made to improving the environment, and these commitments are made by nations and industry in two tranches, kind of commitments out to 2030 and commitments out to 2050. They're real. Investors require them. Society requires them. So they're part of the social license equation. And just making the commitments is a big decision that boards have made. Actually being able to implement those decisions in the mine of the future is actually quite complicated. And an example, for example, if we use zero entry mining or zero touch mining, that assumes we take humans out of the equation, which is great for many things. But I was just reflecting to myself that humans don't have any greenhouse gas emissions that we have to report. So let's say we replace the human with a diesel-driven motor vehicle, 1 for 1. All of a sudden, we'd be pushing out our greenhouse gas emissions that we'd have to report. Whereas if we had a human labor force, the CO2 that humans are emitting, we wouldn't have to. That's just a small example. But if you scaled it globally, you could see how it could have an impact on your reporting. Not that would happen. I'm just kind of being provocative about how this interplay works and why it's so complicated. Another example that just recently was brought to my attention was the notion of replacing and recycling certain commodities. For example, copper. It's been well studied that you need a commodity like copper to enable the green energy transition that we all want to see. But it's also been well documented that you can't get the amount of copper needed by humanity to meet the 2050 commitments without impacting the environment. So our water use, our energy use, our land use, even more than we do today. And so there's challenges in that, but there's opportunities for the thinkers around the call. And I think we can do it. But recycling's not going to get us there, because copper, for example, is tied up in long-term assets. Replacement, and a recent example is somebody suggested replacing copper with aluminium. That's not going to get us there, because current ways of processing aluminium mean that its environmental impact is actually greater than copper. So you have this system that we're trying to improve so that we can all achieve what we want to achieve, which is a more sustainable world for all of us, without getting to the demand. And it's not going to be market driven. You just can't assume that by raising the price of copper, you're going to get there, because the issue is not the cost of a commodity. It's actually knowing how to get it done. Thanks, Gavin. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And you mentioned the automatic thinking of people when we mention zero touch or zero entry mining is less jobs. Any sort of automation, people think less jobs. And mining industry is struggling with its social license to operate and its contribution to community. And that community contribution, a big part of it is jobs. So I'm going to cycle back to Priti now, and Priti, this is a really strange one. We have this fear over job loss, but we've also got this massive skills shortage. And what do you see in the future around what's needed in the mining industry, that's traditionally been run by geologists, mining engineers, metallurgists, and a very large unskilled workforce, a lot of maintenance and tradespeople. What's the future look like for skills in the industry, and where are the shortages, and how do we mitigate this fear of job losses with automation?
Yeah, I mean, it's not perhaps a one-woman response, but I'll give it my best shot. I think automation brings with it workforce transformation. I mean, we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that was a reality. But I also believe that in reframing the problem, it's actually an opportunity, to Michael's point, for the industry to reframe itself as an attractive place for transformation and acquisition of new skills. But that would require for us to sort of reframe our thinking about how we think about skills. It's not just saying, well, we get an employee and he or she has a set of skills. The company or the mining company potentially has a social license to invest in the upgrade of skills. So your relationship and your employment contracts potentially change over time, because you're actually taking your teams over a journey of skill augmentation. So the fitter and turner on site for the mechanical equipment moves on to perhaps being trained in data assessment in a remote operation center. The reality is that there is time on our side. This is not happening overnight. However, it does require us to reframe our thinking from discrete jobs or discrete roles and disciplines to a career pathway. And we have to think about training not as an expense, but as an investment. And actually, if you think about it, the social license to operate and building communities, I mean, what happens is if you do that successfully, and there are mining companies who have offered transformation programs in remote communities in Australia, and they've managed to actually redeploy a whole lot of people into other roles, or actually give them skills to go on to other industries. You won't always get the full take up, because an employee is going to ask, what's in it for me? If I'm living in some outside area of Pilbara and I actually want to become a barista after this mine does shut down or becomes fully automated, then so be it. But the goodwill you get with community and the reset you get with community makes mining a more responsible sector. And when you think about 10 years from now, you could think of it this way: zero touch mining, net zero to environment, and completely 100 plus basis points positive to community outcomes. And a difficult equation to balance, but one that requires us to think about our business model and our human capital differently, is what I would say. The second thing I would say is that, I was reading about this, Gavin, that apparently it's hard for us. There is this skill shortage for mining engineers. You just pointed to the disciplines we need. And engineering is losing its, because of the reputation potentially of the industry. I'm not sure if that's the only thing, but potentially. And also the increase in reputation of, say, sustainable industries, which certainly millennials seem to be driving towards. So if we reframed, I also think that if you look at some of the practical actions of some of our major miners, and they have all made commitments, to hydrogen investments and to venture investments, which are more sustainable and more socially responsible, perhaps it's also an opportunity for us to acquire talent, diverse talent into the sector. If we actually reframe who we are miners of today and responsible companies of tomorrow. Because we, as miners, actually have the capital, the context, and actually an industrial ecosystem to make that change. Not many sectors can be having all those aspects working for them. Yep. So I don't know if I've solved the problem or created another one. Back to you, Glenn.
No, but I really like the vision of that you cast there of, zero harm to the environment, but still meeting the needs of all the stakeholders and building communities. That vision of the future mining company, it can't be just sort of meeting the needs of shareholders at the expense of other stakeholders. So I think that world is coming at us very fast. We are getting a number of comments through on the chat line, and I wanted to answer some of those. And the first one, actually, I can answer from my background of involved, was a simple one around, is the mining industry in Australia using driverless vehicles within the mine? And the answer to that is absolutely. It's predominantly in the iron ores. Both Rio Tinto, BHP and FMG are all using autonomous trucks, and they collectively have moved several billion tonnes, that's with a B, of material with fully automated trucks. So there's no problem there. What is interesting though is it's slower to move to other mines, other commodities, and I think that goes back to some of the comments that Summit made earlier. We have a question here that I want to throw to Summit. Do you think COVID has slowed down the journey to digital transformation in the mining industry, or is it the reverse, Summit?
I think it's definitely a reverse. We were talking about, the remote collaboration. I think technology has realized and, in a sense, has helped to realize what is possible from a collaboration perspective, whether you are looking at the remote diagnosis, you are looking at the getting a lot of experts, right? Whether it is Caterpillar or Surface Mining or, an expert from Schneider and so on and so forth, actually on the call trying to solve a problem. So those are very small examples, but actually that has helped us to realize we can actually do this, right? In terms of not necessarily need to be physically out there. And this has happened, for the reason of COVID. It also, the restriction with the travel in terms of the FIFO. Initially, it started with a challenge, but I think it kind of turned into it had and actually kind of converted into an opportunity, right? But actually, it has accelerated the journey. Now, companies are looking to become self-sufficient. Companies are looking to actually leverage the technology never before. And technology as well kind of helped in terms of how, the cost of a safety instrumented system was much more expensive, right? If you want to remote operate, having, complete reliance of a remote mine site and everything else, actually, because the technology has become cheaper. So I think things have started to converge in terms of the cost. COVID in terms of people not able to travel. And also I would say certainly in the case of iron ore, the prices have certainly helped, to kind of put more invest on to really accelerate the digital transformation in the lieu of COVID, Gavin.
Yeah. And one thing that people often don't understand is the impact of that automation and remote operations together in iron ore resulted in a significant cost reduction to that business. So in about 2013, the cost of producing a ton of iron ore was about just over $30 a ton. Now it's under $15 a ton, and that's a large part of that is due to the digital transformation, both automation and remote operating. And I've seen lots of smaller mines, as you say, be forced almost with COVID to put their toe in the water, at least with some form of remote operations. So I think that's all good. Michael, we've got a question that relates to space exploration. And I know you've dabbled in this, and maybe you can talk about your involvement in space technologies. But the question's really around that's seen as attractive to people. I guess my put on that is that it's still a long way from being economic, except in areas where it's needed in space. But the question particularly was about the skills, the schooling, the education around what's needed to advance a space exploration and how that relates to mining. And I think it's a really close link to what we were talking about with Preti around zero-touch mining. So over to you, Michael.
Absolutely, and thanks, Gavin, and what a great question. I actually have published on asteroid mining, and here at the University of Adelaide, I set up a Center for Space Resources, leading the space mining module. It's now evolved to the Andy Thomas Center for Space Resources. Andy Thomas is a graduate of the University of Adelaide and the first Australian in space. The reason I did that is when I arrived to the University of Adelaide, I was the head of the School of Civil, Environmental and Mining Engineering, and intake to the mining engineering program had fallen to a level where we could count the amount of students starting on one hand. Now, I had by chance, a couple of years before, visited Colorado School of Mines, CSM, and I noted a talk that was given there where they have a very strong space mining program, if you will, that the university said that if it had accepted every single student who applied to start to study space mining, it would have had to build an entire new campus. So, and the notion was there, just as it is here, that if you study, let's call it planetary mining rather than space mining, Earth is also a planet, and transfer knowledge that you need to have to mine and operate remotely in space and using humans only occasionally to the terrestrial sector, that while you might be lucky enough to get the one or two jobs in the Australian or the Indian or the US Space Agency, NASA, that deal with space mining, everybody who graduates would be an attractive, fresh look to the industry and actually be able to approach the industry in a way that I believe in, and that is to change attitudes about young people going into the industry. They have to see it as part of a solution rather than part of something old and out of date, which it really isn't. And those in the industry understand that. But people want more. They want to dream, and looking at space and seeing how they can contribute, I think, is one of the big opportunities. And India has an amazingly ambitious space program, and I would be the first to help champion and build bridges to Indian institutions that would like to work together on the notion of teaching and learning about space mining and transferring that knowledge back to Earth. At the University of Adelaide, we're building the only dirty vacuum chamber in the Southern Hemisphere right now to be able to test equipment that is planned on going to the moon. And we're using our exploration knowledge in what are called heat probes to develop to go to the moon on a mission to help find water, which can then be used for human colonization or creating rockets. So exciting things. And India has, not to misuse the term, all the right stuff. And I'd love to work together with colleagues over there to help establish this as a field where students can study but freely enter the mining sector afterwards. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Michael. We've got some great questions coming in, so I'll throw to one of these, and this is a great one for Preti. I'll read the question and then I'll put my spin on it, Preti, and throw to you. The mining industry in its entirety is very complex, and there are ways to get a sense of the modernisation cost, where the priority should be placed as compared to the opportunities? I understand that the definition of such costs could change every year based on the developments of the technology. Now, there's a couple of things in there that I think are worth reflecting on. The first one is the complexity of the mining as a system as opposed to individual components. And the other one that I've published on is the time to make the massive step change in technology is actually at the construction of the mine, because after that, the processes and the fundamental flow sheet of the mine is set in concrete, literally. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts on both how we manage the complexity of such an integrated system, and then how do we change when the best time to change is at the very start, but that's when all the risk is as well for investors and particularly engineering companies want to minimise the risk, so they go with the old technology that they know has worked in the past. So over to you, Preti.
Thanks. You're giving me the curly ones today. I'll start by saying that it's a great question, and underpinning it are two things. I think you cannot do away with the wisdom of domain knowledge. So two foundations: domain knowledge with cutting edge technology. That combination actually helps deal with the complexity of the system. And you're right, the design phase is the opportunity. So one of the things that does come to mind is that, today, we have geologists, and then we do the whole sort of assessing whether the field is actually, endowed with all that we are looking for, be it copper, nickel, iron ore, whatever. And then there is that whole investment in the drilling, blasting and, loading and trucking. And we design this with sort of what I call the value chain, fully loaded in a physical sense. And one of the things when I think of zero-touch mining, or I think about digital twins, for example, is this idea that we can, before we actually go ahead and, drill holes in the environment, which Michael, of course, is quite opposed to, why don't we actually spend the time using baseline software such as CAD or CAD-enabled files to design the digital twin of that mine, overlay the maintenance equipment or the full supply chain if we possibly can. And I know the fundamentals of such software is already available. And then be able to model mine like the simulation of what this could look like before we actually go and do it in the physical world. A near enough real-time simulation right down to the production throughput might give us that flexibility, Gavin, that you talk about, perhaps. I mean, this is where technology really comes into its own. I think the challenge here is trust. Do we trust the digital twin simulations? And the other challenge here is, do we have enough data from every part of the supply chain so that we can actually simulate it appropriately? So I think the fundamentals of technology are already around, and maybe Sumit can add to this. But whether we've adopted that way of being, way of working, before we actually go and drill holes into the ground, spend a whole lot of money, send people out there to do it, is the question I would ask. But one thing that remains is that without domain knowledge, meeting that cutting edge technology, we wouldn't be able to fail fast, and therefore we wouldn't be able to learn how the model needs to improve. It also is then bringing in, I would say, another set of skills into the mining sector. The actuaries or the data scientists who would actually be doing this simulation mining and continuously learning. And the last piece, if I may, there is a blocker to this, and I think Sumit alluded to this, which is today a whole lot of the supply chain or the ecosystem is proprietary technology. And, if you want sensor data to come from some specific equipment, then you have to write a communication protocol, which has to be on some gateway or the other, which is anointed by the equipment manufacturer. So actually the digital twin and the scientists are already here, but it's the question of whether the integration of the supply chain in the queue, the equipment manufacturers will come to an open protocol standard and will be happy to share that data so that we can actually learn from it before we make this mistake. But I mean, how wonderful would it be if the whole mine simulation model could actually be created before we actually go and do anything in the ground? I mean, imagine if you had to submit a digital twin of a new mine model as your approval for a mine site.
Yeah, now you're talking. Yeah, and actually that's a fantastic answer, because several years ago I was fortunate to undertake a study of other industries and compare it to mining from an innovation and technology point of view. And one of the key findings of that study was how behind the mining industry was in the use of simulation. And our use of simulation, particularly different types of simulation. We do some discrete event simulation, but very little physics engine-based simulation. We do mostly optimization, which is a single outcome, which we know is wrong in uncertainty. So what you're alluding to there is absolutely right. The mining industry is way behind other industries in its use of simulation. And in order to do that, it needs to move to a digital twin environment. So that's a really good point. Sumit.
Gavin.
Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I saw there was a question around ESG and whether it drives competitive value. And one of the things that Priti said about trust, I think that's directly related. If it's okay, if I could jump in around that.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, that's it. Firstly, it's a really great question, and let's first start off and assume that it's correct that any mine company in good standing is not doing anything that it's not required to do with respect to ESG at this present point in time. Okay, so that's why it's a risk that's managed, so it doesn't become a liability. I think if there's trust, then it can become an asset. And again, what do I mean by that? There is some data that shows that mining companies that are doing more for ESG are getting a better premium for their shares. That's not the same as getting a better premium for their product. And I think that it's an important realization that when mining companies talk about their strategy and how important ESG is, that they need to remember they don't need to be the best at the world in it. They just need to do it a little better than their nearest competitor. And that could have big impacts. But their investors, both directly and indirectly, and I mean indirectly, their stakeholders in society, have to trust they're doing and will continue to do the right thing. And these accidents, as Gavin mentioned, issues where companies have made wrong decisions regarding operating in the environment around them, or Another case I read about that doesn't make national news, but it's the wrong thing to do. People that went out and drilled for exploration without seeking local approval. And that was just due to ignorance, not because, again, they were trying to do anything that they shouldn't have done. But that really knocks everybody back. So I think we have to figure out how globally to develop a case of trust. And this means being able to deliver on ESG goals, not just talk about it, but take action. And that means that when you set goals, you need to know you've got a great chance of meeting them tomorrow and in the future, and make the investments it takes to get to the zero touch mind that Preti has visioned, and get to the digital model as part of an environmental assessment or impact process. I mean, these are great ideas, but you have to demonstrate you're actually going to do it for ESG commitments to have impact on shares, commodity prices, and stakeholders. I mean, would we all pay a premium? Let's say again for the copper in the house. Would we, in our own personal homes, would we pay more for if somebody could prove to us it was green copper? And I'm not sure we would. Thanks.
Yeah, if I may jump in as well.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that because this is kind of a very hot topic, and I'm also seeing a lot of questions coming out on the ESG part. You probably already noticing how the overall government, and there's an example where bank is actually offering loans for building the greenfield mine site, and actually the interest rate changes based on the community giving rating around how satisfied and how happy they are in terms of the positive negative impact they have because of that greenfield mine site, right? I think we are, as a community as well, we are becoming much more aware and actually tying those kind of KPIs, which are tied to the performance, financial performance, and everything else. That's probably certainly ultimately is going to help all of us. And there's an example as well how people are thinking. So I really appreciate how things are going in that part.
Yeah, Sumit. Whilst you've got the floor and are talking about that, one of the questions that came in that I think is probably best place that you answer in your position at Director of Accenture. Do you see any political headwinds in Australia's mining automation progress? Should Australia create incentives for developing technology locally to avoid the headwind and focus of technology more geared to mining?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting topic. I would say, I mean, there are definitely, we cannot get away with the political what goes around. But at the same time, I probably see there are two elements. One is the regulatory compliance, and then the example I gave around actually tying in the performance KPIs, for example, the interest rate and so on with the community. That's one good example how we can help. From ESG perspective, from a green environment point of view, by making and executing that. Second, I think from an automation perspective, it's Australia, if you look at the economy, is heavily reliance around the resources. Of course, there is an LNG oil and gas side, but there's also the mining contribution side. So I think it's definitely very pertinent for Australia to actually join hands together and ensuring actually how we can be much more competitive, and also actually to an extent locally relying to certain extent from automation and bringing technology and improving efficiency, and then further actually reducing the cost down, and then obviously helping investing back some of it back to the community. But there's also a global element, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Australia being part of and being influenced with what happens in China from what happened last 24 hours in terms of the iron ore prices, and then what could actually possibly happen in Latin as well from the overall demand and supply. So it's a collaboration, though there is the local element from a government and what we could do, kind of joining hands. But at the same time, there is a certain level of collaboration as well, right? To from a global economic perspective. So that's my view, Gavin.
Okay, just pushing a little bit there along similar lines, a question was around agile supply chains. Now, we're in the mining industry used to a world where we put in the capital and employ all the people. So we've got a fairly high fixed cost component in running a mine. So therefore, we tend to run it flat out and then take whatever price we get in the marketplace. We put it on an open market and we take whatever price. But in an agile supply chain, I'm imagining a world where people place the order for a metal and the mine produces that to order rather than just producing it to stock. Do you have any thoughts on agile supply chains and whether the mining industry would ever move away from its current world of just producing to stock?
I certainly see, the dynamic planning, the agile supply chain will have its role to play, and to a certain, it's there. But again, with a long-term contract, okay, not so much. But in future, with the dynamic nature from the global demand, supply, and also actually, what's coming from what you can import and export duty as well. If it changes from the overall global economy, that will certainly change this, right, in terms of the global supply chain. So, and I think there is certainly a demand, but are we ready? That goes back to some of the things we've been talking about in terms of can we rely and trust the data? Do we have a dynamic plan? Can we actually, up the production or down the production based on actually the demand and the market price and so on? Probably not at this stage, right? But it's very much possible. Technology is there. I think there is definitely a need from the operating model. I mean, Preeti talked about the domain knowledge in terms of how you can simulate and be ready, whether you are looking for an upside or actually you are trying to downgrade your production because of the downgrade of the pricing, for example. So I see there is definitely a role to play, and it's probably forthcoming, right, with the global demand supply chain, but also actually technology enabling and supporting that, Gavin.
Great, thanks. I want to go to Preeti now for a question around community, and it's probably not directly in your area, Preeti, but I think it's something that is really playing on the minds of people, and this question points to it. How do we engage with the community that's near mines in the future when it's all digital? During both the pre-approval stages of mines and during the operating phase of the mine. So the scenario might be where you found a deposit out in the bush. There's a local town nearby, but you're going to operate it remotely from a capital city. Where's the value? And politically, people see value in jobs. So where's the value for the local community?
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna try and visualize this. It's a very good question. So one is I'm imagining a world that if we are actually remote operating it, we would sell the idea of this gold deposit or whatever it is that we've located using a digital twin model, engage the community in it. I'm going to be so bold to say that somehow we will engage the community in a level of share of profits because they may not be significant, but they are enough to embolden the local community to reinvest back into perhaps circular economy initiatives. I don't know, water recycling, rather than actually go and get a job, we might actually have a recycling plant that goes with it, which is more near on the local community and is creating better sustainable outcomes. And the other piece would be perhaps it's a question of how much of it is we are operating from a remote center as opposed to maybe there are some different types of roles that might be created. I mean, it's not going to be a fully displaced situation immediately. Maybe we can engage the community in some response centers, if you like, which are smaller and more data oriented, but happen to be there as well. The last piece is I'm going to imagine that community does have children, and those kids might want to have jobs in the in the actual local city centers, and there could be incentive plans to train those kids up and actually engage them in that very remote operations center. Now, this is a very broad answer because it is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I'm thinking if I was selling it, that's how I would be thinking about it, is actually engaging the community in that way.
And that goes right to there's a recent question just put up about would automating mine operations reduce the economic wealth of remote mining communities? And what you're suggesting is intentionally turning that on its head and actually generating that wealth back. And I think that's what, as a mining community, we've got to do, is actually see how we can generate that wealth in those remote communities, even if most of the operating is done from other remote centres. Now, I'd also like to get your thoughts on I think we've gone to remote operations 1.0 version. And I'll tell you what I mean. We've got these big rooms with all these people sitting in them doing remote operating. About 5 years ago, I visited Jet Propulsion Laboratories in California, and I went into their so-called remote operating centre, which was at that time handling about 19, I think, deep space missions, with all the data coming back and the big screen and all that, with all the data being presented for all these missions that they were operating. And there wasn't a person in the room. And I said to the host that was taking me on the visit, this is a remote operating centre, but where's all the operators? And he said, we don't use this remote operating centre except in extreme emergencies. Everyone's doing it distributed. So they're all, and he used the example of the Mars rover then. Every day, the data from Mars rovers downloaded, and they had 60 or 70 scientists spread around the world, all analysing that data and preparing a task list for rover for the next day, and it was uploaded because of the time difference. They had to do it upload, download sort of approach. People were able to continue with their jobs. Some were professors at universities. Some of them were basking on the beach, working out of a cafe. They were all part of the global team working on operating these deep space missions. But it wasn't a remote operating centre as we've constructed in our minds. What's your thoughts on remote operations of the future?
Since we are sitting amongst IIT students, I think you just created significant job opportunities for them right there, Gavin, because they can all be working for Australian mines while they're in New Delhi or Bangalore or Mumbai, based on that very model. So I'm an optimist, an eternal optimist in technology and in humanity both together. So here's how I think about it, and it's just a proposition. I do believe that remote operations center will be distributed over time. If the automation pace does continue, it's my hypothesis that the skill that we require may not be concentrated in one country. It may be coming from multiple locations. We will go to perhaps a hub and spoke model, but it depends upon for which commodity. And that would come back to the question of national pride, sovereignty, and all those things as well, I suspect. But fundamentally, technologically distributed workforce with the best minds in the world working on that very emergency problem, solving the complex problems, if you like, in a remote operations center sense is something I'm just as a personal view, I would prescribe to, because that means the best minds of the world are working on it, as opposed to best locations are working on it. So it's moving from geography to mindset and to skill set, which is kind of what technology does and automation does. So that's what I would say. I would like to invest in it now so that we can all make a lot of money when it actually does stack up.
Yeah, no, I honestly think you're right, and that really excites me to get. I worked with a small manufacturing company who needed to move into electric vehicles, electric drivetrain, but they couldn't afford to hire a full-time engineer in that space. But they got I think 4 hours a week out of a absolutely top guy from Switzerland who was very experienced. And what they got out of the 4 hours a week from that very experienced guy would have topped having their own person in their own house operating full-time. So, and it also developed their own workforce by exposing them to that top-notch specialist. So different ways of thinking about workforces of the future. It's interesting how we sort of keep going around to this skill sets and workforce of the future, and it comes back to what Sumit was talking about earlier, culture. It's not just the culture of operation, it's the culture of the workforce and how we engage with it in communities. Before we wrap up, there's one other question, and I'll go round to each of you to give your thoughts, closing thoughts, if you like. But Michael, one of the questions was around the tech enabling deep sea mining. Where do you see deep sea mining fitting into the equation? And is the tech the same or is it different?
So thanks, Gavin. And again, I've published with some lawyers on laws of the sea. And right now, deep sea mining is a bridge too far because of international environmental laws, although there might be some merit in mining from the deep sea. But it's probably just as fair to say that at this point in time, and you probably all heard this, we know more about deep space and the moon than we know about deep sea. So it's hard to assess things like environmental impacts. The technologies that are being developed are different, but there's corollaries. And a lot of the technologies that we've used to actually advance the internet with deep sea cables and our understanding of what's going on in our blue water oceans, so off the littoral coasts, I think is relevant. But I think that the communication systems offering at different broadbands, et cetera, are going to be completely different. So when I've been asked about that before, I've suggested to focus on the automating what we have and bringing automated and remote operations to the remote areas on our surface and right below our surface rather than turning to deep sea at this point in time. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you, Michael. I'll go around the table now and look for 2 minutes summary of from each of you on your thoughts coming out of the discussion we've just had, and we'll go to Sumit first. Sumit, what's your thoughts?
Thanks, Kevin. I think it's been quite exciting, and I see a lot of synergies in like-minded thinking from Preeti and Michael and Gavin Yusuf as well. And also questions align in terms of how we are thinking around whether you call it zero entry mining or zero carbon, zero touch mining, as we talked about. I think there's one thing which we have not discussed, and I would like to touch upon that, is basically how do you start, right? How do you kind of make it real, right? Whether you are kind of tier 3 miner or whether you are a big miner, right? And I see there's a starting point always, whether you look at from a golden thread perspective in terms of where the value is, the maximum value it is in your value chain from a mining perspective. And then second as well, from a starting point, leveraging whatever assets and people and skills and system what you've got, right? And then identifying your biggest losses or biggest waste, whether it is lost production opportunity, whether it is on a yield side, whether it is on a supply chain side, and actually trying to find that the biggest loss, right, and the biggest opportunity, and then starting from there, because actually once you have some runs on a board, right? Then people start to believe in technology, and there's a faith, and you can actually certainly build, on that basis. So I would probably like to close that, right? That kind of technology as an enabler, it's there, it's out there. I think people and everyone, kind of collaboration is key for our success in terms of realizing everything we talked about, whether you talk about collaboration within the people or you talk about the collaboration across the ecosystem. And then, of course, honoring the ethical mining and a few things we talked about from a geopolitical space. So I think with that, I'm conscious of time. I'll close it. Gavin, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. And I still remember when we first talked, you mentioned 000, zero harm, zero loss, zero waste. And I think that's a good thing to keep in the front of our minds.
That's right.
Thank you. Priti, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'll be quick. I think certainly, resonate with what Sumit said. Zero-touch mining can be a reality. I think considering we're sitting in an IIT alumni event, what I'd say I would put forward is a call to action because this is probably the upcoming and the current generation of engineers who can actually help reframe the sector. So, I'd rather put a call forward saying, hey guys, we need your help to reframe the sector, to take it where it can go, and to, as Sumit says, make it real. And it is probably the only sector I'll reinforce, which is almost an economic cluster, and therefore has the capital and with your will, probably will have the courage to reframe itself as well.
Great. Thanks, Priti. And, when we first talked, you talked about the opportunity around autonomy, intelligence, and the transformation of work. And I think you've covered that really well today. So thank you. And Michael, do you want to summarise your thoughts after this discussion?
Look, as a professor, I have to put this out there. I believe that culture, everything we do, has a foundation in education. So with such a global talent mass as IIT students and graduates are, I would encourage you to reach back to schools and share your time and thoughts and the visions that you have to help advance society for the benefit of us all. Help other students that haven't been as fortunate to get to study at what you've been able to by having events at your workplace. And talk about it at home and with your kids and your family. If people are informed, I think they'll be able to help us all achieve our common goals. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And I think you hit on a really good note. It doesn't matter which way we look at the future, we're going to need metals and they have to be mined. So mining is enabling that future, and it's how do we do that sustainably, and that requires a collective effort. So thanks for that. Mining is part of the solution, it's not the problem. So that's what I tend to leave or like to leave this conversation with. So as we finish up here, let me thank the panel members, Sumit, Priti and Michael for their great thoughts and insight into the future of mining, and I hope everyone got something out of this. And let's keep the conversation going on the various other forums that are available. So thank you, and back to the main session.